Why the Southeast U.S. is so sparsely populated along its coastline, a geography deep dive. Take a look at this population density map of the United States, and something striking stands out along the southeastern coast. While other coastal regions are bustling with life, here in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, the coastline appears almost empty compared to the booming cities of the interior. Cities like Atlanta, Columbia, Charlotte, and Raleigh are all located deep inland, far from the coast. In contrast, major coastal cities like Savannah, Charleston, and Wilmington remain small, none even cracking 1 million in metro population. Despite these coastal locations, the largest cities are nowhere near the shores. So, why is this? What keeps these southeastern coasts so sparse? Let's break down this fascinating and often overlooked population pattern, starting with geography. The fall line, the geography that shaped cities. The United States, particularly the eastern seaboard, is dominated by two main geographical features, the Appalachian Mountains and the Atlantic Coastal Plain. The Appalachians, once towering mountains, have eroded over millions of years, but they still divide the Piedmont region, rolling hills and hard rock, from the flat coastal plains, sandy and swampy. The most critical line on the map here is the fall line, a natural boundary where the Appalachian rivers drop in elevation, creating rapids and waterfalls. This line marked the furthest point European settlers could travel inland using their ships. Settlements formed along these points because they were the last accessible, navigable points along the rivers. Cities like Atlanta, Columbia, and Raleigh thrived here because they were strategically located at the fall line, perfect for trade and manufacturing. But geography alone doesn't tell the whole story. The coastal areas of the Carolinas and Georgia have something that the Northeast and Florida do not: swamps and wetlands. The coastal marshes of this region were perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes, which carried malaria, one of the deadliest diseases in history. This epidemic led to a massive demographic shift. The wealthy fled inland to avoid the disease, leaving Charleston and Savannah temporarily depopulated during the summer months, while cities in the interior, such as Atlanta, began to thrive. By the late 19th century, malaria was significantly reduced, but the interior cities had already established themselves as the powerhouses. The legacy of malaria and its control shaped where people lived, far from the coastline. Even if the coastal cities had their advantages, natural harbors like Charleston and Savannah, they were isolated. The nearby coastline was dotted with swamps, wetlands, and shifting sandbars that made building large ports and settlements difficult. In contrast, New York City and other northern coastal cities have deep, sheltered harbors that help them grow rapidly into metropolitan hubs. Further south in Florida, the coastal marshes are less intense, leading to easier settlement. In fact, the tropical environment of Florida never allowed malaria to take hold the same way it did further north. By the 19th century, railroads brought a new shift. Cities like Atlanta became industrial hubs, not because of their coastal proximity, but because of their strategic inland location. The arrival of railways connecting major cities and the growing importance of airports like Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport cemented Atlanta's dominance. Cities that initially seemed like temporary stops on trade routes, such as Augusta and Columbia, were transformed into permanent urban powerhouses, driving the shift of power from the coast to the interior. Another deterrent to coastal development was hurricane risk. The coastlines of Georgia and the Carolinas are vulnerable to these storms, with their outer banks creating the most dangerous and treacherous coastlines in the U.S. Cities along the coast, like Wilmington, were never able to grow into large metropolises, unlike the protected Northeast or Florida. By the time the railroad and air travel opened up these interior cities, the legacy was set. Atlanta, Charlotte, and Raleigh weren't just geographically positioned in strategic spots. They had infrastructure, they had access to resources, and most importantly, they were safe from the dangers of the coast, hurricanes and diseases. So, why is it that the east coast of the US, especially from Virginia down to Florida, is so densely populated, but the southeastern coast, Georgia and the Carolinas, remain so sparsely populated? The answer lies in geography, historical diseases, and strategic infrastructure. The coastal plains didn't have the same advantages as the northern and southern coasts. They were isolated by swamps, malaria, and hurricanes, forcing populations inland. Once cities like Atlanta and Columbia had established themselves, they began to dominate economically and politically, shifting the focus away from the coast. The fall line cities prospered, while the coastal ones remained small, despite their natural harbors. In the end, it was a series of geographical, historical, and environmental factors that shaped the development of the Southeast US, and they continue to affect where people live today.